Hi Ian, good evening to you, good evening panel. George Galloway MP, the grandstanding one-trick pony. Will he purr like a cat that has got the cream, or act as an XL bully when he savages his political opponents in Parliament?
Were either of you actually in the chamber when he took his seat today?
No.
Did you deliberately boycott it, or...?
No, I was visiting medical school in Chelmsford with the health minister.
I watched it on television in my room, so I saw him being introduced.
Well, Ian, let's start with you. What do you think of Stephen's question there?
I think Parliament's got a way of swallowing people up, so I don't think George will have the impact that he might think that he would have. I regret, I have to say, that he's been elected. I find his views quite repulsive, to be honest. We have to respect that the voters in Rochdale have put him in. That's really to do with the failure of the political system that we've got at the moment. But this is, we don't need more division in politics. There are many issues that we face, whether we're talking about at home or whether we're talking about the global situation, the situation that pertains in the Middle East. We've got to get to a ceasefire. We've got to get to a situation that there's a roadmap to recognition of Palestine.
Well,
and
you agree with him on all of that, don't you?
Yeah, I think there's a context of how you do it, and obviously respecting the rights of the Israelis and that, making sure that the prisoners are released. We will only do that, Ian, if the political parties in the United Kingdom come together, and I regret that we haven't had the ability to do that. We've done it over Ukraine. We should be able to do it over this as well. We cannot divide over this. But fundamentally, what we then need to do is to make sure that there's a consensus across the United Nations, across the Security Council in particular. The death and the destruction, the loss of life in Gaza is something that should absolutely horrify all of us. And I would say to colleagues, regardless of what party they're in, Ian, that we have a responsibility. One of the things, and I've said in the chamber, we often reflect on the genocide. We reflect on Srebrenica, Rwanda, Darfur, and so on. We're very good at doing these things. What we need to make sure that we take our responsibilities when conflict is taking place, and we have that hand of friendship to both Israel and Palestine. In that regard, the election of George Galloway doesn't help us.
Vicky Ford.
Well, I'd go further than saying we don't want division in politics. We don't need division in society. And that's what I find really quite scary when you get these very extremist views. And that's why the Prime Minister took time to make that speech on Friday.
Well, we have a question on that, so don't go too far down that road.
But sitting in Westminster at the moment, often as an MP, you can get quite a lot of issues directed at you personally when things are bubbling up outside. But actually what we've seen since that horrific attack in October in Israel, and then since the situation and the deaths of so many civilians in Gaza, is more and more hate being directed at ordinary sort of peace-loving members of the Jewish community, members of the Muslim community, a huge rise in anti-Semitism, a huge amount more hate being directed at moderate Muslims. And this is being stirred up by, as the Prime Minister said, by far-right, by Islamists. As opposed to Islam is very different, but by this extreme view. And that's what really worries me. We've got a history in this country of being tolerant, of getting on with each other, of letting people from all walks of life, all religions, all creeds work together in our communities. And we mustn't lose that. We mustn't lose that.
Going back to the question, what do you think George Galloway is going to be like as an MP now? He hasn't been an MP, I think, for, is it 13 years? Well, since 2013, I think I read somewhere. He's not going to add to the unity of the nation, is he?
Well, I wasn't in Parliament when he was here before, but he's very clearly already trying to stir up that hatred against the people in the middle, against the moderates. And I think that's why it's so important, so important that we don't let that happen. I mean, I think what happened here, sadly, was a failure of the Labour Party to field a candidate that they could work with. But I think they were absolutely right to get rid of the candidate who shared the views that he had made so clear. But that left them in a position that they weren't fielding a respectable candidate. It's shown huge huge divisions within the Labour Party as well. And actually, we all need to protect the society that is tolerant of others.
I wish we had a Liberal Democrat on the panel tonight, because I don't understand why they put no effort into that by-election, because it was a Lib Dem seat from 1972 to 1997, from 2005 to 2010. And you think, well, why on earth did you not, particularly when the Labour candidate fell by the wayside, and they did absolutely nothing. Anyway, that's a side issue. Hashi.
Well, I think that George Galloway, I would summarise as being a solution to a problem we shouldn't have. George Galloway I've described as a parasite who goes to places to literally just sow division, make the most of people's views that might not be palatable. But I also want to be absolutely clear as to why George Galloway is where he is and why he has exploited the kind of situation that we're in. The reason, for me, is quite critical that at the moment there is a sizable majority of people in this country who really strongly believe that there should be a ceasefire and that should be the position of our country. The Israelis may not take any, care about what we might think, but that's what people think, and that's not being represented in our political class and the political establishment at this precise moment in time. And so instead of actually engaging with that point that he is now using to exploit the situation, we get this weird debate about extremism and that it's all the Muslims who are interested in this. It's only the Muslims who are voting for George Galloway, when a percentage, I think it was about 22% or something like that, of Rochdale is actually Muslim. 28% of Rochdale is actually Muslim. And when you see the majority of people who are protesting for a ceasefire to take place in Israel, who are not Muslims, they're being smeared as these hate figures. By whom? By somebody who was only Home Secretary just not so long ago. By whom? Somebody like Lee Anderson, who smears somebody like the Mayor of London in the way that he did about being controlled by extremists. By whom? Robert Jenrick, who was only just recently a minister. These are the extremists. These are the people who are sowing division in our society. And then they have the temerity to turn around and point at George Galloway as somehow he is the symptom of our problems. George Galloway is just reflecting...
You just referred to him as a parasite.
He is a parasite, but he's only reflecting the extremism that we're seeing in this government. The extremism of a Home Secretary only recently in power, the extremism of a Prime Minister who doesn't understand the public mood about this issue at the moment. And so for me, George Galloway is not going to do a single thing to help the people of Rochdale. I cannot imagine he understands a single issue for most people in Rochdale. But he's there because the rest of you have failed. That's the reason he's around. That's the reason he's in Parliament, is because the political class are completely absent. And when the real leaders and the moderates leave the stage, only the extremists have fun. And that's why we're here.
Please stop pointing your finger at me, okay? Because actually, it was the Labour Party who didn't field a candidate here as well. Okay, this is part of the cause.
The Labour
here,
Party's not here. You're part of the government, and the Labour Party isn't here.
Divisiveness in that election.
What about the Secretary of State? What about the Secretary of State who are talking the way that they are? Do you want to address that?
So the Prime Minister has made it very clear in his speech, which we're coming to this next, is that we must continue to be a tolerant society that is tolerant of others. Everybody.
So why hasn't he condemned what Lee Anderson said?
He has.
No, he hasn't.
He
refuses to say that it was an Islamophobic attack.
He took the whip away.
He took the whip away from him.
But why did he take it off?
Because he said it's a completely unacceptable
thing to say.
Was it Islamophobic? It's a completely unacceptable thing to say.
Was it Islamophobic?
And the Prime Minister has been very, very clear that there is an argument over the definition of Islamophobia.
The Mayor of London says. The Mayor of London says.
It's absolutely clear that it is racial and religious hatred, which is not acceptable, and that is why Lee has lost the way.
Has Lee apologised to the Mayor of London?
And Lee
has he apologised to the Mayor of London? Has he apologised?
By the Prime Minister, and he's not, but he is no longer a member of my party, and I think that is the right action.
Well, he is. He's just not a member of the parliamentary party.
I think,
we haven't heard from Howard yet, if you don't mind.
Thank you for the... I tend to agree with Ian and Vicky on this, and to some extent what you're saying, Ashi. The problem we've got here is that what really alerted me is when he stood up in his acceptance speech and said, this is for Gaza. And there is... the problem is this division that's being created right across the country. I'm a humble public affairs campaign. That's what I do. And I'm now standing for London Mayor to try and heal division in London. Because I think we have the most divisive mayor there's ever been. I think Lee Anderson, what he did was actually identify the massive elephant in the room that's a problem, but it was a crass way he actually said it. And we must have a proper debate about it. We've got to heal these divisions and bring all parts of all ethnic groups all together, because they are British, and we need to do that.